Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, and welcome to Modern Church History. Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Hi, Teresa. Nice to be back again.
Thank you. It's good to have you here, and a nice, beautiful, sunshiny day again. We've had clouds come through, but nothing's dropped on us yet. So
that's for sure. The last couple of days we've had this some really bad weather around. So remember that little psalm there that go 1,000 fall at my side and 10,000 at my right, near me it shall not come. Up in here in St. Louis, we can only hope that it stays that way.
Absolutely. It has been much too close for us.
Well, what we're going to do now is start actually wrapping some stuff up over the last several weeks. We have had an opportunity to look at the groups of people and ideas that will eventually take many people outside of the church. They've developed an ecclesiology that is different from the one that is Catholic, Orthodox, and at the same time, we've already looked at the Renaissance papacy and the interest in the arts and in the patronage of arts and architecture and things of that nature. And now there's another group, another movement within the church that's contemporary with all of this that is actually reforming the church before the so-called Reformation. And this is a group that really, we know some of the names, but by and large it sort of gets a short shrift. And so this is actually going on at the same time these other things are going on. And it's really good for us to see this because then we can realize that, in fact, the Catholic Reformation was well underway. Often people refer to the Catholic Reformation as the Counter-Reformation. They look at this as a lockstep, that you have abuses in the church. The reformers reform the church by making it Protestant, and then the Catholics are those who don't leave to become Protestant, and then they get their act together and reform the Catholic Church. In fact, in actuality, when you look at the lives of these men and women, actually the Catholic Reformation is already underway even before the Protestant Reformation. Okay. So it's really kind of a fascinating thing. And really, once again, I think we really have to look to the Council of Constance, the results of that. Remember that after that, there is this blossoming of church activity. Yes. The monasteries, there are new monasteries being founded, being reformed. You have so many lay Catholics who are involved in all kinds of activities, and so really that council that solves that terrible long problem of the papal schism, once that's taken care of, once you have a pope like Martin V and Eugenius IV following after him, then things begin to really roll. And I think we want to say that the three trends that are taking place is that you've got some that are taking people out of the church. You have at the center itself, the patronage and the arts, and then you have the others who are encouraging people to stay home, but meaning stay home in the church. But these are also cleaners. They want a clean house, and if we look at individuals, we'll see this take place time after time.
Sounds great.
One of the first that really gets underway is actually born just a decade and a half after the Council of Constance. He's a Spaniard, and his name is Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros.
Okay, I'm not going to try to write that one down.
Okay. Well, I'll give it to you later on. But he was born in 1436. Okay. Dies in 1517. Okay. He spends his entire life reforming. Interestingly enough, he dies in 1517. That's the same year that Martin Luther nails the 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg University. So, interesting fellow. His entire life then spans that period before, and his area is in his own home country, Spain. As a young man, he joins the Franciscans and just has a tremendous respect among the Franciscans for him. He is an exemplary monk. and in fact eventually becomes the provincial in his province over all of the other Franciscans. Later on, he's made the Archbishop of Toledo, which is one of the most important dioceses in all of Spain. He is then elevated to become cardinal, and he is the personal confessor of Queen Isabella.
Okay.
So he is highly regarded. He himself is a humanist. Now, the interesting thing is his name has been besmirched in history because he was the Grand Inquisitor of Spain. I was just going to guess that. You know? Okay. And the deal is, and there's been some really wonderful research in the last number of years on the Spanish Inquisition and showing the truth behind it. Because what we have in our minds and in most of our history books is what's called the Black Legend. And it attacks the Spanish Inquisition. But I would recommend to anyone the works of Henry Kamen. It's Kamen. He's an historian. He's just recently come out with a book called Empire, and I've got it. I can't wait to read it. But it's the history of the Spanish Empire, its rise and its fall. But his earlier work was called the Spanish Inquisition. And what he does is by using computers, is able to go through and do a statistical analysis of all of the Inquisitions in Spain. And what he's discovered, and he's not alone with this, other historians who are really looking into this, because the records are all there. They're still there, intact. And as they study this, they find that it is exactly what it said it is. It's an inquisition, an inquiry. And basically, you have this impression of torturers and all this kind of stuff. The vast majority of these people were lawyers.
Okay.
Some of them were theologians, but most of them were just lawyers. And anyway, he's the Grand Inquisitor of Spain, and he is going to introduce into Spain the new learning. This is that whole Renaissance. Remember, we talked about Christian humanism before, and he is going to introduce Christian humanism into Spain as a way then of encouraging and enlivening the faith in that country. In 1500, he is the founder of a university, the University of Alcalá, and is very, very interested in translating into Spanish. Spanish as a language is one of the first languages, modern languages, that we're going to find a lot of writing in that language, literature in that language. And one of the first things he does is he encourages the translation of the Imitation of Christ into Spanish, so that Spaniards could read the works of Thomas Kempis, which we'll talk a little bit about in a couple minutes, without having to learn Latin. Another book, and here's something kind of interesting too, another book that he came across is absolutely taken with, is a book entitled The Life of Christ. And it is written by a German. He's a mystic, and his name is Ludolf of Ludolf of Saxony. He has it translated into Spanish. Okay, that book, a half generation later, is going to be one of the few books, a half dozen books, owned by a family in Spain who are going to be taking care of a young man who was wounded in battle, and he's bored, has nothing to read. And all he has is the lives of the saints and this book, The Life of Christ, by Ludolf of Saxony. His name is Ignatius of Loyola.
Oh, yes.
I mean, isn't that something?
Oh.
And it's really Jimenez de Cisneros who encourages the reading of these books, and remember now, at this point, you have the printing presses.
Right, so they're becoming more available.
Yes, that's right, and so they're not cheap.
Right, they're still not quick, I would assume.
Yeah, but they're a heck of a lot better and a lot easier, a lot cheaper.
Hand copy.
Yeah, than hand copying on parchment.
So they could get more than one copy at a time. They could just in other words, they can just print. Yeah. Yeah,
and so anyway, he disseminates these, and he's pretty much responsible for this.
Wow.
Cardinal de Cisneros is also responsible for the translation of the New Testament into Spanish. He in 1514, 3 years before his death, helps to get the New Testament translated from the Greek into Spanish for people. In 1522, shortly after his death, another project that he had been very much involved in was what's called the Polyglot Bible. And the Polyglot Bible is several translations of the Bible. We have early Greek translations or copies. We have the Vulgate, of course, of St. Jerome, and then there'll be other languages, and they're set side by side so that you can read through the Scriptures and get the nuances of the words. So really, scriptural studies is now just really opens up, and it's Jimenez de Cisneros who's involved in doing so much of this. So you can see the incredible influence that this guy had.
Definitely.
Yeah. One of the other things he does, too, is he hires a translator. He's a brilliant humanist. His name is Elio Antonio de Nebreja. Okay. And he sets about working on the Polyglot Bible. In the process, he discovers that St. Jerome's translation, which is a wonderful translation, has some errors in it. Okay. And so he brings this to the attention of other scholars. Interestingly enough, de Nebreja is then accused by some of the scholars as being heretical because, he's challenging. He's brought before the Inquisition, and the Inquisition is questioning him. Well, who's the Grand Master? But Cardinal de Jimenez de Cisneros, and they say, well, wait a second. He's seeking out after the truth. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not heresy. And so instead, he was reinstated and then continued his studies. Another person that he was very instrumental in career-wise is another humanist. This is a Spaniard. His name is Juan Luis Vivez. We don't, in the English-speaking world, don't know as much about Vivez as we should. He was just a brilliant man, a wonderful writer, a teacher, a personal friend of Thomas More. And also Desidarius Erasmus, who we'll be talking about a little bit later on, too. He was born in 1492. So he's a very young man when he catches the eye of Cardinal de Cisneros. But the cardinal recognizes this as a young man who can make an incredible contribution to the church, and so he encourages him and moves him along. Eventually, Juan Luis Vivez will be teaching at Louvain, in Bruges, and also in England. And that's where he met Thomas More, and they were lifelong writing companions after that. He wrote a book called On the Help of the Poor. And in this, he argues really interesting stuff. He argues that the government should provide certain basic social services to people. This is in 1500. He's saying this. And he's especially talking about what he refers to as the worthy poor. And these are going to be orphans and widows and those with disabilities and things of that nature. And he's certainly one of those who would argue if you can work, you should work. And in fact, even has an idea about that too. He also argues that there should be free medical service for the poor, and that it should be provided for them. And added to all of this, that it's the government's responsibility to set up some kind of an agency to help unemployed people find work. This is in 1500.
Wow, isn't that something?
Yeah. And so this is in that book, On the Help of the Poor. He's arguing for the Christian responsibility of Christian governments, of Christian nations, to do this. Then he also begins advocating some other things too, like, for instance, universal education. He believed that all children had the right to go to school, boys and girls.
Oh my goodness, that's very early.
It very much is. Yeah. Certainly. you had some small schools set up, mainly through academies, and then you had private tutoring. You had some monastery schools. All of those things are in existence. But the very idea of universal education, that everyone should be educated, and that's including girls as well as boys, is certainly an unknown concept for those days. He had a brother, Alfonso Vivez, and he served at the court of the Emperor Charles V.
Okay.
So he's a writer and a humanist at the court of the emperor, and he himself is able to introduce to the emperor some of the humanistic policies of his brother. Interestingly enough, one of the books that comes to the emperor's attention, he has a copy of it, he reads it, we know this for a fact, is written by Thomas More, Utopia.
Oh, okay.
The emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, king of Spain and all kinds of other things, and he reads this book, and he is so impressed with it that he looks over to the New World, and he looks to Mexico as a land of great opportunity.
Oh, that's right. Puebla.
Do you remember that? That's
Puebla.
exactly right. Yeah. He uses the book Utopia in order to found a city in Mexico that would be a city of the angels, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Puebla de los Angeles. And originally, now of course, unfortunately, human weakness gets involved. But
right.
The first couple of years, when this city was set up, it was set up to be a model of Thomas More's Utopia. And as a result of that, hopefully then to become a benchmark for every other city in the world.
Mm-hmm.
What a wonderful idea if that had been able to
wouldn't that if that had
off.
carried its way through.
But it just goes to show you also with the influence that these men had in influencing public policy. Once again, most of us in the English-speaking world are unaware of a lot of these things that are happening.
Right. Unfortunately.
Yes. And interestingly enough, too, when you look at a map of Europe at the time of the Reformation, you don't see anything happening in Spain as far as the Protestant Reformation. Why not? Well, the reason
because you have all this truth going on.
That's exactly right. The church has already been reformed. Now, Cardinal de Cisneros was also involved with the direct reformation of the institutional church in Spain too. So besides really encouraging the new learning and all the implications of that, he also wanted to reform the church and believed sincerely that the way that you reform the church is through the Eucharist and through the priesthood. And those were the two areas. Yeah. He was dealing with the typical European, we're talking mainly secular clergy.
Right,
that has
been appointed by, all right.
Yeah, they are, some of them are very wonderful guys, but by and large they're not well educated. There were no seminaries at that time.
So who was it last week we discussed that went from, in 1 year, went to, was ordained and then became a bishop and
yeah, right,
Zoom.
Cardinal Pope,
right,
one
exactly.
right after another. Yeah, there was no way of a spiritual formation. Spiritual formation of a priest in those days really rested on when he was a young man. Coming under the wing of his parish priest or some other priest, and that priest would help him at a minimum learn how to say the Mass in Latin, and not much beyond that, you know. And so it's only later on, really, with the Council of Trent, that you get a really excellent seminary education and spiritual formation that is introduced, and everything changes then. But at this point, it's not there. And so Cardinal Cisneros has a lot to work with, a lot to do with these guys. For one thing,
had to start somewhere.
And the first thing he had to start with, and it's humorous to us today. The first thing he had to do was send a rule out saying that every priest had to say Mass on Sunday.
Oh my gosh!
Now we pretty
That's
much think that as a minimum, don't we?
Right. They have the daily Mass. That's now
right.
Okay.
Yeah, but then it was even a question of, look, you got to say Mass at least once a week on Sunday.
Oh my gosh!
He mandated that every parish in every diocese in Spain have a Sunday school for children.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, that's a good place to start. They've got to be educated.
Yeah, it's the next generation. And it really is a wonderful thing to do, because not only does that mean that you have education for the children, but it also means that the adults have to learn the catechism themselves in order to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really touching some very, very... And notice what he's doing. His Reformation is starting on the parochial level, in the parishes. Mm-hmm. Priests say Mass. Mm-hmm. Pastors set up religious education for your children. He then mandated that in every church in Spain, the Blessed Sacrament should be reserved. Now, that's remarkable. But many Catholic churches in Spain at the time simply closed their doors. They opened up for Sunday Mass or whatever, and that was it. Wow. Now, here was the opportunity for people, once again, the parishioners of a parish. And remember, these parishes are close in. It's not like they had to drive miles and miles to get to their,
like we have here. We're
so blessed in South St. Louis. You can see steeple after steeple, and you can walk to church. Well, why walk to church if there was nothing there?
Right.
And now the Blessed Sacrament was available, and people then could go during the week and spend time in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament.
That alone's an education.
I'll tell you, So then what happens after that, and you see this time after time, when people become aware of the Blessed Sacrament's presence.
Yes,
then
exactly.
There's a whole new sense of who they are and what they're doing and what this church is all about. And guess what becomes a popular custom? Genuflecting.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
Everything we take for granted, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And then so the love and the respect of the Eucharist, right? The follow through of that then is an understanding of the ministerial priesthood.
Okay. Yes.
So everything is going hand in hand, and this is all the movement that is being done by this one man. This one man in Spain who has the ear of the Queen, of course, but is a holy man in himself and recognizes all of this, and so begins, moving in this direction. He also introduces, so that we would remember our baptism when we go into the church, that there would be huge bowls of holy water, so that you could bless yourself with these. Now, he didn't invent the holy water font, but he once again is popularizing all of this.
Wonderful.
Now,
wow.
You have to have carrots and sticks. And we just were talking about carrots.
Right.
But not all the priests were real excited about changing their lives. They were pretty comfortable the way they were. Mm-hmm. And so he comes in with a couple sticks. And one of those is that the priests had to live in their parish.
Okay.
There were priests who were simply living in, some house or some apartment someplace, and they would simply come over to the parish.
Well, if you only had to be there on Sunday.
Yeah, right. So no, he wants them living in the parish. He wants them living at rectories. Mm-hmm. Once again, he introduces the old rules about who can live in the parish house with the priest.
Okay.
Like cooks, cleaning ladies, that kind of thing. And then so that brings up once again the questions of celibacy. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating as I look back at this, is that here is Cardinal de Cisneros in the late 1400s, basically once again using the same tools and the same regulations and the same guidelines that were introduced in Spain at the Council of Elvira in the early 300s, when celibacy was first talked about from a legislative point of view. We know from earlier church history that celibacy has always been with us, part and parcel of our priesthood, and in the Catholic Church, and so here once again we find now in the late 1400s the force of that council being reapplied in a systematic way in order to have a celibate clergy. Now, another thing about here's where the stick comes in. Okay, because he has the ear of the queen, priests who were recalcitrant and said, "Oh, the heck with you! You know, who do you think you are?" found themselves in prison for a while.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Well,
big
okay.
whoops. But the end result is that you have a cleaned house.
Right.
At least in Spain, you're going to have a cleaned house. One of the other things he does too is he mandates that all baptismal records be kept in the parishes.
Okay.
You know, and then that a registry of all parishioners be kept also. That's not common practice back then. It was just assumed that everybody in Spain was a Catholic, and so no big deal. Well, no big deal that doesn't fly well with Cardinal de Cisneros. You know, this is a big deal, and so there you have these things taking place. You know, interestingly enough, twice in his lifetime, he was so respected that when the King of Spain died, he became the regent for the next king, because he was too young to take over for himself. Even at the age of 80, with all of his other responsibilities, he was the regent of Spain. Could you imagine a country being ruled by someone like this? Yeah, just really.
It just goes to show what that did for the people of Spain, and
That's
why
right,
they didn't have to suffer through the loss.
Yeah, that's for sure, and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So anyway, and like I say, I'm really excited about reading Henry Kamen's new book. I can't wait to read that.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, because you can really get a feel for what it was like to be in Spain at that time.
Do you know, was there a call for canonization for Cardinal?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. I know there is for Isabella, his spiritual directee, but I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good point.
He did so much. I mean, just because what you did, I know doesn't make you a saint, but he really sounds like he really did a lot to.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing is he is undoubtedly the most influential of the early reformers. Obviously, an entire country,
right.
And from that, an entire empire. You know, because this influence is not just in Spain itself.
It's gone to
all
Mexico.
Of Latin America, the Philippines. I mean, you know, much of world Catholicism that we have today is touched by Hispanic Catholicism, and much of Hispanic Catholicism is touched by Cardinal Jimenez de Cisneros. You know, that's what a legacy. You know?
No kidding. That's what was making me think about that. Wow.
Now, he was not alone. There were a number of other bishops and in different dioceses. I'm going to name some of these off. Chances are you'd have to run to a map or atlas to see even where they are. And that's unfortunate because they also reformed their own dioceses. And as a result of that, those dioceses had no problems when it came time to the Reformation. Their priests were reformed. Their parishes were sound. Their diocese itself was sound. One was an archbishop, a bishop of Carpentras in southern France. This is actually very close to Avignon.
Oh, okay.
We've mentioned some weeks back about Carpentras, but it's a lovely little area down in southern France, and the bishop there had reformed the diocese. Another in Verona. This was Cardinal Ghiberti, and he also reformed the church in Verona itself. Another in Chieti, another small diocese, and this was Gianpietro Carafa. And the interesting thing about him is later on he is going to be elected pope. He will be Pope Paul III.
Okay.
And so he has an opportunity, a very brief opportunity, to bring his reform to the universal church. But even as a bishop, he's already doing that in his own diocese. Another Italian bishop, Contarini, also reforms his diocese, and not only that, but it also works very closely with Protestants in order to dialogue with them and bring many of them back to the faith. We all know the story of St. Francis de Sales and his tremendous work in Geneva, which will take place a generation later. But here we have already one in Italy working with Protestants, trying to reason with them and bring them back to the Catholic Church. Another one that is well known also is Cardinal Cajetan.
Okay.
He is a Dominican priest, and he reforms his diocese of Gaeta. Does tremendous work. He is the delegate that is sent by Pope Leo X to Martin Luther to try to reason with Martin Luther. And of course, as we'll see a little bit later on down the line, there was no reparation possible. It was broken and it wasn't going to be repaired. But he attempts that. At least one German bishop is among this list also. This is Bishop Persinger, and he's the bishop of a tiny little diocese down in southern Germany called Chiemsee.
Okay.
It's a lovely lake, the Herrenchiemsee Lake. It's a beautiful little lake near Munich. But his diocese was reformed too. The one big diocese in Germany that could have stood for some reformation and could have done was Cologne.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the Archbishop of Cologne begins the Reformation and then ends up kind of botching it and then leaving the church himself.
Oh.
There are a number of bishops, German bishops, who will lead the church in the Reformation. This takes place a little bit down the line. So rather than reforming the church from within, they come over and join that other group that's taking people out of the church. But the interesting thing is that each and every one of these dioceses that you see, when the clergy is reformed within that diocese and when the parishes, the diocese itself is reformed, there is absolutely no need for a Protestant Reformation in these dioceses. And it's all based on the Eucharist,
Right.
the priesthood, and good solid catechesis.
Right.
You know, it really is. But
Well, even today, if we can get people to understand the truth.
yes, yeah. But
I know. Okay.
There is now all of this is being done. You know, this is one of those things of thinking globally and acting locally.
Right. Exactly.
Well, that's exactly what's going on there. There was one opportunity to think globally and act globally.
Okay.
and this came at the Council of the Lateran. This is the 5th Lateran Council.
Okay.
It is not well known, and which is a great shame. It was called by Pope Leo X. The reformers came, and they talked about the problems of the church. One of the most influential in this council was none other than a layman, a humanist. We've talked about him before. This is Pico della Mirandello, and he's invited. He's a lay scholar, and he's invited to this council also. This is going to be the last opportunity for the universal church to reform itself, and it happens in March of 1517. In October of 1517, Martin Luther is pulling out the nails in the hammer. You know, so we're talking 6-7 months.
Right.
You know, and this was the real last opportunity. Della Mirandello is a very influential individual in all of this. As I say, he's a Christian humanist. He taught at the Platonic Academy in Florence, and so he has an opportunity to influence a whole new generation. He himself is influenced and brought to the study of philosophy, and really has the opportunity to study Plato. We had so much when we talk about the new learning. The old learning was based on Aristotle, you know, and then of course this goes back to the time of St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, several hundred years later, much of the literature that had been written by Plato that was assumed to be lost because of the barbarians, you know, it was rediscovered, and it was rediscovered mainly in the East, in monasteries and in libraries that had been, unfortunately, some of them came about as a result of the sacking of Constantinople, and knights who were involved in that. You remember that ugly incident. Many of the knights, they wanted to take souvenirs back home, and it's kind of hard to carry big statues, and you can't carry buildings, but one of the most expensive things you could take back,
With
and
a book.
it's a book. It's easy to carry, and it's worth a bunch of money. You know, you're somebody in town if you own a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought these books back. Well, when they got back, you know, they just sort of sat around again. And remember that so between the books that were brought back from the East and the books that were discovered at the time of the Council of Constance, remember the humanists had gone into those monasteries, routed around, and pulled out books that had been sitting around for hundreds of years. Nobody had read them. Well, with all of this becomes the basis for the new learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so translators like Marandello are now bringing up all new kinds of ideas from Plato and others. He is one of these. He's sort of like a Thomas Aquinas in the sense that what he does is he takes the new learning and applies it to the old, and he represents it to a new generation. And interestingly enough, what he does is not only does he take Plato's works, but he takes the works of St. Thomas Aquinas and then represents these in a modern sort of a way so that people can understand them. So he's not standing against Thomas Aquinas, but rather he's interpreting Thomas Aquinas for the people of the Renaissance. It's a very interesting kind of an approach. Well, now this is a man who's going to have a lot of influence at this council, and if you had to say, what do you stand for, what do you believe, it would be this. He argued for the oneness of truth, that all truth is, when we get to the bottom of it, all truth is going to agree. You can't have two truths. And all truth finds its unity with God. Okay? And this is available to everyone. You don't have to be a great intellect, but the basis of touching truth is coming in contact with and embracing Christian love. Everything else from there unfolds. Mm-hmm. Now, as a result of this, he also believed that we need to be studying everything. And he goes out of his way to learn Hebrew and to study the Talmud and Kabbalistic writings. These are Jewish mystical writings of the Middle Ages, and encourages scholars, Christian scholars, to study these writings also in seeking common truth.
Okay.
With these. Now, at the end of the council, as the council is coming to an end, it's Della Marandello who is invited to stand up and address the council. And so he does. He stands up and he says, we've been talking about Italian politics. You know, we've been talking about, you know, the papal states and foreign policy and all that. We've been talking about the Turkish threat, and it's a real threat. You know, the Ottomans are still on the march, and they're trying to overthrow Christianity and all. We've been talking about the laws of the church and that. And we've defined heresy and what is heresy and who is a heretic and all of that. He says, but beware, we have been ignoring the big problem. And this is what he says here. And this is a direct quote. And he's speaking not only to the cardinals and all of the bishops who are there at that council, but also to Pope Leo X. Now, remember Leo X. He's a Renaissance Pope. You remember he's the one that said to his nephews,
We've inherited,
God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it. Mm-hmm. He is the one who is ignoring his own advisors up in Germany, saying you got to do something. Mm-hmm. He's the one who's involved with encouraging the indulgence sales and all that. He's sitting right there. And this is what this layman says to him and to all the other council fathers. He says, if Leo leaves crime any longer unpunished, if he refuses to heal wounds, it is to be feared that God himself will no longer apply a slow remedy, but will cut off and destroy the diseased members with fire and sword.
Wow.
Wow. You know, and so what happens is that many of these reformers, many of these cardinals did go home, and many of them are looking around at what's happened in Spain and Carpentras and Verona and others and going, yeah, we need to do this. But remember that by the time they got home, the Reformation in Germany had already broken out.
Mm-hmm.
It was, in fact, too late to act globally. Now, we'll have to wait a couple generations of popes before we do have that opportunity with people like Pius V, St. Pius, who's going to act on the global level with the Council of Trent. So all of this is going to have to wait another 30 or 35 years to take place. But you do see that the movement is already underway on the local level, already taking place. What I'd like to do is spend a little time looking like maybe beneath the surface, sort of like taking up the turf and looking at the dirt underneath, the ground underneath, and seeing all the life that's in fact going on in that. And I think one good place to start is a group of men who were gathered together in the late 1300s, and they were called the Brethren of the Common Life. And they were the organization was founded by Gerard Groote, the Dutchman. And it's an outgrowth of the late Middle Ages Devotio Moderna. This is a piety. This is a strong piety. It's a sense on the part of lay people of their own role in their salvation and being close to the church. Groote himself was a wealthy lawyer who gave up everything and became a Carthusian monk. And what he does is he encourages other men to form together this lay brotherhood. So they would not be priests. They would all be brothers, lay brothers. And they would not take vows like normal monks would. But instead they would live a common life of piety, praying together, living a common life, poor life, living in the new up-and-coming cities. Now, most monks would withdraw from the world and go to monasteries in the country. These, on the other hand, would go to a city and live in the city, in the same house, in common, And what they would do is they would cultivate the spiritual life, their own spiritual formation. They would serve the poor. And then the second apostolic work that they would do is they would teach the young. And so they set up schools. The best known of all of these is going to be none other than Thomas à Kempis. He lives from 1380 to 1471. And almost the entire his adult life was lived in one monastery setting. One of these houses of the brethren in the village of Zwolle, and it's there that he wrote the Imitation of Christ. And what he does is in that book, certainly he reinforces all of the practices of the church and all of the he looks for ways in which the individual is able to come in contact with the sacraments and with the Eucharist and with doctrine, so that the doctrine lives in his heart, not just on the shelf of a book. A couple of weeks ago, we had the honor at the seminary, Kenrick Lennon Seminary, to host Cardinal Dulles. And before dinner, some of us were talking to him, and he mentioned that not often enough do we take the documents of the church. Do we take the Code of Canon Law? Do we take the Catechism and use that as the source for our spiritual reading and for our prayers? This is exactly what Thomas à Kempis is doing. If I could just read one little section from the Imitation of Christ. This comes from a book called Spiritual Masters. It's written by Archbishop Alfred Hughes, the Archbishop of New Orleans, and the subtitle of it is Living a Life of Prayer in the Catholic Tradition. And what he does is he takes about a dozen different spiritual masters throughout church history and then gives a little history behind them, who they are, where they come from, what were the issues of the day, and then little sections of their reading so that you have a taste for these spiritual masters. You might want to pursue them a little bit more yourself. This is what Thomas Thomas à Kempis is saying at the beginning of his book. And notice how he's putting his priorities straight and encouraging all Christians to do the same thing. He says, the highest wisdom is this, to aim for the heavenly kingdom through indifference to the world. Vanity it is, therefore, to strive for perishable riches and to rely on them. Vanity it is to court honors and to set oneself up for lofty estate. Vanity it is to go after fleshly desires, and long for that by which you must be heavenly punished. Vanity it is to wish for a long life and care little about a good life. Well, that's a neat idea. Vanity it is to attend only to the life that is and not foresee the days that are ahead. Vanity it is to love what is passing at full speed and not hasten there where lasting joy awaits. So putting your priorities straight. You can imagine these words. I mean, this is the most read book outside of the Bible, the most read book in Christendom, the Imitation of Christ. And you could imagine this in the hands of these wealthy burghers, the middle class in the towns,
right?
And then how this challenges them. You can imagine this. I would hope that some of the popes in Rome might be reading this book too. What a challenge it is for everyone who would spend this time with Thomas à Kempis and setting their orders straight.
Right.
So just a tremendous influence here with him, and then he has a dear friend who, interestingly enough, does a lot of writing himself, but doesn't publish anything. Actually, his stuff is published after he dies. His name is Wessel Gansfort. And what he does is he takes the Devotio Moderna and he takes this new learning, combines the two together, and then really has great emphasis on the Bible. And what he eventually does is he reads Hebrew as well as Latin and Greek, and does some translations and all of these things. But this is going to lead him in a direction away from his dear friend Thomas à Kempis. And he's going to embrace some ideas. As I say, he writes these down, but they're not published until after he's dead. He writes these ideas down, and interestingly enough, they sound like Martin Luther had written them.
Oh, okay.
So some people are coming up with different understandings and interpretations even in this new learning.
Right.
Another individual who's very important and also tied very closely with the brethren of the Christian life is Desidarius Erasmus. And he was born around 1469 and will live a pretty long life. What happens is he is first off sent off to his pedigree is not very good.
Okay.
He's an illegitimate son, and his father sends him off to study with the Augustinians, I believe, around Gouda, and he's there for a short while when his mother gets control, or what they call custody, of him, and she transfers him instead to another city in the Netherlands, where he is given over to a school run by the Brethren of the Common Life.
Okay.
And so his own formation, he's there 9 years, and his formation then is going to come heavily through the Brethren, and of course the influence of Thomas à Kempis then too. He receives an absolutely incredible Latin education. He's a brilliant young man. Erasmus is a brilliant young man. He studies the ancient classics. He learns the languages. He has an opportunity once while there to meet an intellectual who is his name is Rudolf Agricola, and he is known as the educator of Germany. This guy is just has tremendous influence, and so he's inspired. And he wants to be like this man too. And so he continues his studies. Eventually, he finds a way to go to the Louvain to study at the great university at the Louvain, to Paris, to the Sorbonne, to Italy. He learns Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and then finally settles down in Heidelberg, at the University of Heidelberg, where he lectures. This is in 1482, and continues a number of things along those lines. However, around this time, his mother has died by this time, and his dad's money has run out.
Oh, okay.
So he has to get serious now. He needs a patron, somebody who's going to help him study, because it ain't cheap. Back then, it ain't cheap now, but it wasn't cheap then. And so, for whatever reason, it's not the highest of reasons, but he discovered a vocation to the Augustinians, or at least for a while he did. However, in doing that, he also comes in contact with the works of St. Jerome.
Oh, okay.
And he has the opportunity now of studying the Vulgate and the Bible, and he is absolutely taken with St. Jerome, this incredible scholar who knew these languages so well as to translate the entire Bible into Latin. So on the one hand, he looks at St. Jerome as a model, and then at the same time, another Renaissance figure, Lorenzo Valla, who he's a Renaissance a Christian humanist, and Valla, probably his greatest contribution to Western civilization is the idea or the discovery of what we would call an historic anachronism. And what that means is that if you look at a document and there's a word in there that wasn't invented until later on, you know that it's a fake. For instance, an example of this, if we were to come across a school day's writings, an essay written by Adolf Hitler, okay, and in this essay that he wrote for 7th grade, he says that someday I will lead a genocide against the Jewish people. You know that's a fake, because the word genocide wasn't invented until 1946, at the Nuremberg trials. And so you know that's a fake. And believe it or not, I guess nobody ever thought of that before, but Lorenzo Valla is one who does that. In a broader sense, he really introduces the historical critical method of study of any kind of document. And this really catches Erasmus also. So in both of these cases, you find inspirations for both of these. Later on, he went on to become the secretary for the Bishop of Cambrai. And then in 1492, he was ordained at Utrecht in the Netherlands. And with that, his bishop very kindly allowed him to go to Paris to study. And while in Paris, he didn't have much by way of money, but he tutored on the side, especially English students. He seemed to have liked English students. Once again, he becomes a very good friend, a correspondent with Thomas More and also Bishop Fisher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, both of them.
St. John Fisher.
Yeah, and so he kind of specializes in tutoring young English students who have come over to Paris to study. Eventually, he will be the tutor of Henry VIII.
Okay.
And as well as he is also the tutor of the son of King James II of Scotland. So these are pretty high up guys that he's dealing with. He also finds time not only to teach, but also to write. And one of the most beautiful little pieces I've come across by Erasmus is called The Handbook of the Christian Knight. Okay. And what it does is it's actually a manual for ethics and for what he calls the philosophy of Christ. He says that every human being is given certain interior gifts, and our formation is to develop those. Things like piety, like love. And those are the things that if we pursue those, rather than pursuing rules and regulations and customs and traditions and things like that, but if we really touch those, that we enter into the heart of Christ and truly then can become a Christian. It's during this time that he finds himself translating the Bible also, once again, out of the Greek. In fact, he takes there are actually 5 different Greek Bibles that had been discovered by this time, 5 different translations. He takes 4 of the 5, comes up with a common translation that would make even better sense.
Wow.
Really quite an incredible fellow. And then later on in 1517, he publishes yet another book. This is called The Education of the Christian Prince. It is meant to be a counter or an opposition to Machiavelli's The Prince. Machiavelli's Prince says that you do whatever you have to in order to win. Erasmus says that as soon as you do that, you lose. Mm-hmm. And instead what you need is, he says that politics is applied ethics. Isn't that interesting? Politics is applied ethics. In other words, an ethical person, when he applies his ethics, that's what politics is all about. We don't even use that definition today.
No.
Would not be a bad idea.
I was going to say. To ponder that.
Yeah. He found himself locking horns with a lot of people, and especially with Luther. Mm-hmm. Luther thought that he had him on his side, and Erasmus was very coy throughout all of this. The two of them would go back and forth and argue all the time. Erasmus would say that truth is sought in learning, that you learn truth in learning. Luther would say, no, you're wrong. Truth is through faith. It only comes through faith. And Erasmus is trying to say it's not either or, it's both, buddy. And he would say that Christian tradition is the unfolding of providence. And Luther would say, well, tradition is nothing more than works, and works are void. They don't do any good. Erasmus would say that human reason is a guiding light. We need that. And Luther would say, no, it's a stumbling block. So in this great contest between the two, and we'll talk a little bit more about Erasmus. He's just a very, very powerful figure right at the opening moments of the Protestant Reformation. He dies in 1535. Okay. And he dies a very sad man, because he had just received word that same year that Bishop John Fisher and Thomas More were murdered by Henry VIII. This moment shows us the difficulties of a Christian humanist in this age that is going to get ugly real fast.
All right.
Yeah.
Father, wonderful show. Really enjoyed it, and looking forward. Are we going to carry on a little farther with this?
We're going to talk a little bit more about it, Erasmus, and then we really want to look at the education of Martin Luther. Where did he get these ideas?
Right.
And then after that, then we'll start looking at why he was complaining, what he was complaining about, and look at the Protestant Revolution. I'm going to explain next time around why some historians refer to it as a revolution, not a reformation.
Right.
Yeah.
I think more accurate term.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, would you close with the prayer for us today?
Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.